Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the northern part of Ukraine, about Chernihiv Oblast. I'll remind you that yesterday we discussed situation in this region, and according to several pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russian Federation is probably preparing an offensive against the Chernihiv region, as well as the Kharkiv and Sumy regions. RBC Ukraine source notes that the armed forces of Ukraine are transferring additional troops there for defense. So that was the statement that we discussed yesterday. And if you remember yesterday, I told you that according to several pro-Ukrainian sources, some groups of Russian forces were discovered in this region, in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Semenovka. And today we have added this icon to map, and this is exactly the article we are talking about. So according to several pro-Ukrainian sources, it is reported that an assault group of the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces attempted to establish a position near the settlement of Zarychya in Chernihiv Oblast. As a result, the group suffered losses in equipment. Later we got additional note to this article is that this information wasn't, let's say, verified, so it's unverified. Anyway, this statement about unverifying information could be something like a trick from the Ukrainian side. You know that when talking about this region, I'm not surprised that the Russians could be spotted, could be discovered in this area. The thing is that if you take a look at this map, you're gonna see three states, let's say not three states, but three colors of this region. We have the territories under complete Russian control. We see these territories. We have the territories under complete Ukraine control, and we have territories between the settlements of Krasnolozye, Karpovich, Gati, Timonovich, Medvedevka without any color, which means that for some reason we decided to remove colors from this area. And the thing is that in November of 2024, during the November more precisely, we got a lot of updates from this territory. Let's discuss them in details. So as you can see, there are three important icons exactly on the border between Ukrainian territories and the territories without colors. So, and according to information we have, during the November of 2024, the Russians destroyed all bridges along the river by the name of Snov. So this is the first bridge that was destroyed by the Russians as a result of FPV drone attack, and this is the second bridge that was destroyed by the Russians. So the Russians destroyed both bridges with FPV drones. So in this video, for example, we can see exactly the process how the Russians were destroying. Basically, the Ukrainians mined the bridges in case if Russians begin offensive operation, they could destroy the bridge anytime. But the Russians discovered these mines and they destroyed the bridge by themselves. So this is the first bridge that was destroyed, and in this video we can see how the Russians also discovered mines below the bridge, and then the Russians destroyed this bridge as well. So let's return back to map. This is the first bridge that was destroyed, this is the second bridge that was destroyed, and basically this is the third bridge that was destroyed by the Russians. As for this bridge was destroyed either by FPV drone attack or maybe by artillery strike. Anyway, somewhere by the end of November, this part of Ukraine that we currently have no color, you see no color, was cut from the mainland as a result of this Russian special offensive operation. Furthermore, at the same period of time during November, we got a lot of videos from the territory a bit to the east from the area we just were talking about. We're talking about right now the village of Muravyi. We have a lot of videos and lots of statements with the Russian flags and the Russian soldiers. So now we have no doubts that the Russians are working in this direction with the sabotage and reconnaissance groups. And most likely during the previous several days, the Russians indeed crossed the river by the name of Snov, and probably the Russians were trying to encircle the settlement of Zarychya. The question is what the Russians are trying to do right now. Most likely the Russians are planning and are trying to concentrate forces in this side with the purpose, after they are able to concentrate a critical mass, to begin offensive operation further in the direction of the settlement by the name of Semenovka. So this will allow the Russians to cut this salient. First of all, this is a very huge salient that is not very good, very easy for Ukrainians to protect, and the Russians have no problems basically to cut this salient and to shorten the distance to the main supply lines. So this is the situation, let's say, in the northern part of the Chernihiv region. Now let's discuss the situation in the northern part of the Sumy region. Today we got another update from pro-Russian sources, and according to information we have, the Kursk region authorities are evacuating rural residents of the border Rilsk district due to shelling from Ukrainian state acting governor Alexander Hanstein. Over the past 2 days, the Ukrainian armed forces have attacked the bridge over the Abesta river in the village of Kozina in the Rilsk district, which is located 2 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, several times. As a result of the attack, the bridge was partially damaged. So the Russians are saying that most likely this bridge was destroyed, and that the Russians currently are trying to evacuate people from this small salient. And you know that we see that most likely from this direction the Russians may try to attack also in the direction of the Sumy region as a part of the operation to create secure zone. And with this offensive operation, most likely the Russians will try to cut this small salient. Why the Russians are so active in this area? We discussed the situation several weeks or months ago. The Ukrainians used these salients, the territory around the settlement of Novgorod-Siversky, Shostka, and so on, so this salient, the northeastern part of Ukraine, with the purpose to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia with the use of drones. And from this salient, the Ukrainians usually attacked the city of Moscow, the capital of the Russian Federation. And we discussed that if the Russians want to reduce risks and if the Russians want to, let's say, to stop this attack of the territory of Moscow, first of all, they need to cut this salient and to create a secure zone exactly in this part of the Chernihiv and the Sumy region. So, summarizing everything, we see that probably in the very near future something big may happen in this area. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous night, about 30 drones in Chernihiv and Sumy regions, so there were lots of explosions and lots of attacks carried out by the Russians. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sumy direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. According to information we have, and during the previous 24 hours, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Basovka. So the Russians shown a small advance in the southern direction with the purpose to cut the NO7 road between the settlements of Oleshnya, that is located on the territory of the Suja region, and the territory of Yunakievka. So we see that the Russians continue offensive. We see that the Russians are moving slowly, which means that Ukrainians show fierce resistance. At the same time, we continue receiving videos how the Russians attacking and destroying Ukrainian vehicles and temporary deployment points in the vicinity of the settlement of Yunakievka, which means that this territory is already under complete Russian fire control, and this means that this is very difficult for the Ukrainians to keep forces here, because every single day they suffer huge losses, mainly in the equipment of the Western production. Furthermore, according to information we have and according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians indeed improved their positions along the border, and according to pro-Ukrainian source Deep State, the Russians entered the settlement of Oleshnya. This territory is marked as a contested area or the gray zone according to pro-Ukrainian sources, and according to the same source, the Russians improved their positions towards the village by the name of Garnal. As for the village of Garnal itself, we still haven't received anything that confirmed the Russian presence on the territory of the settlement. The Russians are getting closer and closer, but without their presence on the territory of the village. At the same time, several very reliable pro-Russian resources reported that Russian servicemen of the 22nd and the 30th regiments of the 44th Army Corps of the Sever Group entered the vicinity of the settlement of Garnal in the Kursk region and are fighting there, the group told RIA Novosti. So we believe that currently the clashes are taking place for this church. This is very important church for the Russians, very huge complex as you can see, and the Russians are trying to take this territory first of all. The sources reported that yesterday we got reports that around 300 Ukrainian soldiers were encircled on the territory of this church. This is not just the church. We need to understand that there are a lot of underground facilities, and there are a lot of positions that Ukrainians can hold for a very long period of time. Now let's discuss the situation in the Belgorod direction. During the previous days we got lots of reports that confirmed Russian progress on the ground, and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back abandon both the settlement of Popovka, and the Ukrainians were forced to abandon the settlement of Demidovka. And today we got another very important report from the Russian intelligence. According to the Russians, there is reinforcement in Russian direction. Another company of Ukrainian strike drones has arrived. Think about it, there are more than 200 of them in a narrow area. So the Ukrainians have over-concentrated the significant number of FPV drone operators in this direction. And it's very difficult to understand what are the purposes of the Ukrainians to slow down the Russians or to test new tactics. Currently, it's very difficult to understand, but obviously we're going to receive a lot of updates from this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Toretsk and Chasiv Yar direction. We have lots of very interesting updates from this area as well. And the most important updates are coming from the Kliban-Bytska water reservoir direction. During the previous night, the Russians managed to improve their positions once again. If you remember yesterday, most of the mappers, including pro-Russian, neutral, and pro-Ukrainian, have adjusted their maps of the village of Kalinovo under complete Russian control. And also the Russian sources published this video as a proof that confirms Russian control over this territory. But today, by the morning of the 30th of April of 2025, this building was geolocated, and this is exactly the building where the Russians raised their flag. So as you can see, we still have some doubts whether the Russians managed to take this village under complete control. As for now, we have just one geolocation, but from the most southeastern part of the settlement, which means that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to enter this part of the village, but we still have some doubts whether the Russians control the central part and the northern part and the western part of the settlement. Anyway, when talking, for example, about pro-Ukrainian sources, during the previous 24 hours, they have adjusted their maps, and according to them and according to pro-Russian resources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their position significantly from the settlement of Rozovka-Alexandropol in the northwestern direction. Now we see that currently the Russians are trying to outflank the settlement of Valentinovka and to get as close as possible to the road, to the N20 road, to this intersection of roads between the settlements of Kalinovo, Sukhaya Balka, let's say Novomikhailivka and Kliban-Bytska water reservoir. So the main task for the Russians as for now is to establish complete control over this intersection. If the Russians are able to do this, then the inside defense of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area will collapse automatically. Furthermore, the Russians continue their pressure from the settlement of Zeleno Polye in the northeastern directions, trying to get as close as possible to Alexandropol, Zarya and Gnatovka. As a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take additional territories under complete control. So we see that every single day we are adjusting the map in the Russian favor, and we believe that during the upcoming 24 hours we will do the same once again. Furthermore, the Russians began bombing and attacking the positions of the 157th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. According to information we have, the Russians are bombing and attacking the settlement of Novopoltava. It's very difficult to understand whether the Russians are planning to begin offensive in this direction or they're just trying to slow down the Ukrainians from the 157th Infantry Brigade and to prevent them from attacking the Russians in the area of Berezovka and Tarasovka. So we see that the Russians are trying to hold their flanks and not allow the Ukrainians to counterattack them, while the main group of Russian forces is moving towards this pocket with the purpose to cut this pocket completely. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk, from the Pokrovsk to the South Donetsk direction. Today we have additional change on the ground on the territory of the settlement by the name of Kotlina. Today the pro-Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see lots of episodes how they were attacking the positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, the territory of the settlement. There are different episodes, different seasons as you can see, but for example this moment took place on the territory of these facilities. And based on this video, we have adjusted the map, we have adjusted the contested area in the Russian favor. So as you can see, contested area means that some sources reported that this territory were retaken by the Ukrainians without any proofs, and now we got some proof that confirms Russian control with this territory, and we have recolored these territories back under complete Russian control. So anyway, we believe that we will adjust this map and this part of Kotlina once again in the future. We believe that there are still very heavy clashes, and we expect that Ukrainians will counterattack if the Russians control this territory. Let's move further. As for the Novopavlovka direction, today we have adjusted the map. We have colored additional territory under complete Russian control, and this is, for example, the situation by the end of the 10th of April. This is approximately the day when the Russians began their offensive, and today, by the beginning of the 30th of April, we have enough of proofs to color all these territories under complete Russian control. So this is how the situation was developing since the 10th of April of 2025. We expect additional progress on the ground. We see that the Russians are trying to outflank and to attack the city, the settlement of Alexeyevka from the north. The Russians will continue, obviously. Now let's discuss the situation, the settlement of Bogaty. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of videos how the Russians were attacking, how the Russians were bombing the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the most northwestern part of the settlement. And this is very important video because you know that, for example, if we compare the situation during the previous days, the Russians mainly were attacking the southeastern part of the settlement. And we were talking a lot about this, that the Russians were trying to destroy positions of the armed forces of Ukraine before the beginning of their offensive. But now we see that the Russians have moved their focus in the northwestern direction, which means that something changed in their tactics. And maybe the southeastern part of the village was already secured by the Russians, and now they have no barriers to attack this area with the purpose to dig in deeper. So due to the Russian change of Russian control of artillery and FPV drone focus to the northwestern part, we expect that the Russians are about to begin their major offensive operation with the purpose to take the southeastern part under complete control. Probably that's it about the changes on the ground. Let's discuss several political events. I'll remind you that yesterday, according to information we have, the Ukrainians lost another F-16 pilot, and the sources reported that they lost not just the pilot but also the F-16 aircraft. So Ukrainian sources reported that Ukrainian F-16 destroyed by Russian missile. That was reported by the Western media, but the problem is that the Russians are too far from the city of Kiev to bring down F-16 with the missile. So basically, according to information we have and according to several pro-Ukrainian sources, the crashed F-16 was shot down by Ukraine air defense. I'll remind you that the Ukrainians still don't have their friendly fire system, normal friendly fire system, settled or normalized, configured let's say a friendly fire system, and this is the reason why the Ukrainians are losing the second F-16 probably since the beginning of 2024. And most likely, if they're not going to fix this issue, they will continue losing these machines with the pilots as well. So this is the situation in this area. Furthermore, according to information we have, several Ukrainian deputies reported that they advocated for mandatory conscription of women into the Ukrainian army. So we believe that Ukraine itself is coming to another very important step in the mobilization process when they will start mobilizing women. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.